Quick reminder, we record this show on Thursdays. It airs on Saturdays, and the television program is up on Monday evenings. And I tell you all that because Saturday is the Nevada caucus. We saw the Nevada-based debate Wednesday night. All of those candidates are in play in the caucus vote in Nevada. And joining us now on the ground in Nevada is our good friend Daniel Marans. Of course, you know Daniel's work from HuffPost, where he is politics reporter. So without any further ado, Daniel Marans in Nevada, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, Richard, though I am offended by your pronunciation of Nevada, which, as Harry Reid or anybody else will tell you, is pronounced with a flat A. Nevada.
So Nevada, you say Nevada, I say Nevada. Let's call the whole thing off. You probably don't know that reference, but
Yeah.
okay, so it should be Nevada, huh?
Yeah, not a huge thing. I won't tell anybody, but yeah, that's just sort of the one of the little points of snobbery of reporters who parachute in here every 4 years is that you need to know how to pronounce that.
Well, okay. I stand corrected. I'll trot it out 4 years from now. Okay, so you're there. We had the debate. Let's start with probably the obvious question from the people you're talking to today. Again, Thursday. Debate was last night as we record this. You think that debate changed very many people's minds?
I think that the biggest outcome of that debate was obviously taking Bloomberg down a notch. I think that one of the beautiful, more elegant elements of the sort of attack that Warren launched about the non-disclosure agreements is that much like the issue, albeit smaller and more minor, of Pete Buttigieg's non-disclosure agreement with McKinsey, it's the sort of line of question that can generate its own multi-day news cycle where we'll now be asking as reporters, hey, are you guys actually going to do this? Are you going to follow up? Are you going to release this stuff? And if he doesn't, that also becomes a story. So, and I think also just so much, and this is one thing I really tried to focus on in my coverage, so much of Bloomberg's pitch on the airwaves has been an electability pitch. And that's not surprising because it's been a focus sometimes in a very facile way in this presidential primary. But if your pitch is electability against Donald Trump and you're getting your ass dragged around by not just Elizabeth Warren, but to some extent Joe Biden, I thought Pete Buttigieg threw some very effective elbows as well, and Bernie Sanders, then maybe you're actually not that electable. And I think so that the biggest outcome, rather than just be a positive one for Elizabeth Warren, who had a very standout performance, but I'm not sure has the fundamentals to turn that into a material bump. We'll see. And I'm hoping to get some more intel on that at some events later today. But I can tell you right off the bat, as someone that just covers this, even without looking at the polling numbers, this was brutal for Bloomberg, if not terminal. But you know,
right. It took me a second, but okay, yeah.
The Bloomberg terminal, folks, is sort of the product that continues to make him extraordinarily wealthy. It's a source of timely financial information for people in the financial services field. Anyway, you know but in all seriousness, I think again the biggest takeaway is a negative one for Bloomberg rather than a positive one for anyone else.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and not, I don't think all that different from my own. First of all, look, Warren had a great night. I personally, to put my cards on the table, felt like cheering when she went after Bloomberg on the disclosure agreement. This is, I think, the Elizabeth Warren that most people first got to know when she was coming up, first with the CFPB and then the Senate, and the one that has cross-examined bank CEOs and others and done a terrific job. But I also agree with your assessment that it may not have been a game changer for her status. I mean, to me, in a way, and I'm not saying this out of any partisan fondness for Bernie or anything. To me, when you're a solid front runner in the polls, as Bernie is, and you come away from a night like this pretty much unscathed, I think that's a good night for you because you're still going to be the front runner. And I guess I would only add to that, I didn't think Pete had a good night. I didn't think Amy had a good night as opposed to last time where she seemed to really, so just on the horse race side of it, I guess I would say, yeah, Warren was the big winner. Don't know that that translates into votes. Bernie was by default not being touched, was helped by it, and Bloomberg, man, it was like one of those, I can't remember, one of those Agatha Christie stories where it turns out there was a murderer, which in this case was Bloomberg's career, potentially, and all the suspects did it because it seems like so many of them piled in on him. But have you heard anything specific on the ground today? Have you talked to many voters about the debate? Did they have any reaction? Did they watch?
So I'll be honest with you, I have not yet been to an event today, but I will be going to, I believe, a Buttigieg canvas kickoff and then a roundtable of Black women discussing issues related to that, where a Buttigieg ally will be speaking. But I think that latter event should have a broader selection of voters. I think, I have been in touch with some people who I met at early caucusing, though they're sort of firmly in one or another candidate's corner. I think that always is the challenge and the question, because the types of people that tune into the debates, even on the national scale, are often already highly informed voters and therefore more likely to align with a particular candidate going into the night. And so it's a challenge to tell whether they were able to differentiate themselves. I mean, I think, look, what we're talking about here is who fights for second or third place. Assuming the polling holds and Bernie pulls this out, then we're talking about Pete potentially being able to demonstrate that he has staying power in a state with a large minority population, which has sort of not been his forte, shall we say. Maybe that's understating it a little bit. Or if Warren is pulling in there. Now, over the course of these next couple days, it's sort of interesting. In the run-up to the final caucus on Saturday, Warren is going to be in I believe I think it might be Salt Lake City. Bernie's going to be in California. I believe that Buttigieg has some events out of state. They're already sort of looking forward to Super Tuesday. And again, this is a case where campaign infrastructure really does matter. And so Bloomberg has really tried to turn this into a sort of a black and white Batman versus Superman, him and Bernie. And while for the most part that's BS spin, in terms of campaign infrastructure, the Bernie juggernaut has had a huge operation in California, and they've had they have some kind of an operation in Texas and a number of other Super Tuesday states. And so one of the challenges for a figure like Klobuchar has been that in Nevada, she just didn't have anything until she had that surprisingly strong performance in New Hampshire. And so now the ability to project forward, to say, I can take this state for granted and I'm now going to be traveling out to other states, or to travel out to those other states just because you're rolling the dice and you don't really have a choice, is a reflection on sort of that early infrastructure, that investment, campaign funding. And again, whether Warren or Buttigieg really pulls into that second or third place should be really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think, and again, we're talking with Daniel Marans, political reporter for HuffPost. So, and I think part of what you're saying is that, and we've seen this year after year, is that while the delegates at play in Nevada are few in number compared to California or Super Tuesday, other Super Tuesday states. Of that, especially if you're not the front runner, you're looking for momentum. Obviously, if Bernie were to dramatically stumble in Nevada, that would be a problem for him. It sounds like he doesn't believe he will. But the unknown quantity here, I think, and you may have looked into this in detail since you're there, but it is the caucus process itself. We have, first of all, because it doesn't necessarily reflect polling since it's not a direct vote situation. Secondly, we have the wild card of how the voting will be reported this time around after the catastrophe in Iowa with that. So how much does the mechanism of it being a caucus have the potential to upend what people think will happen here?
Yeah, I think the good news is that hopefully the Nevada Democratic Party will have done a lot of calculating by the time even Saturday rolls around, because they did have that 4-day period where something like, I mean, close to 80,000 people caucused early. I was sort of staking out outside the Culinary Union Hall in Vegas and seeing late into the night that there were people sort of waiting online patiently to caucus. So that may be one advantage. I did speak to someone. I haven't reported in depth on this. I did speak to one caucus volunteer named Seth Morrison, who actually comes from Northern Virginia and retired out here. And he was pretty alarmed. He was alarmed at the way they'd been training with the iPads. Or rather, the lack of training with the iPads. He was saying that on Tuesday night he was feeling a little bit better about it because they were going to be doing iPad training for some of these volunteers. But there's also a paper ballot backup, is what the state party has told me, and I have spoken to state party officials. They're really priding themselves on doing this better than Iowa, and specifically, I mean, the moment after Iowa happened, Harry Reid's, sort of the paterfamilias, or the patriarch of Nevada Democratic Party politics, said, "Not on my watch," effectively. And of course, he's now an old and somewhat infirm man, and had that black fedora on last night before the debate, sort of saying we're going to thump Trump. But I think that there's a lot riding on that. And what we saw in Iowa is that Buttigieg picked up the most people, or at least the largest percentage of people, from first alignment to second alignment in places where other candidates were not viable. I don't know in a contest like this how much the non-viability factor is going to play, because I think the people that were not viable in Iowa were generally Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar. I think to some extent, obviously, Andrew Yang, and he's not in the mix here. But whereas I think here it's probably a little bit more consolidated between Bernie, Biden, Warren, and Buttigieg. So I'm not sure how much lack of viability is going to play, and therefore the realignment game. But you're absolutely right that if there's just not a clear result again, it will at least help Bernie's rivals, because if he was the one who was favored to get that first place finish and he's deprived of that once again, then he'll probably be deprived of some of that bandwagon effect that comes when you really develop momentum. And again, I mentioned how the stakes of this state for Bernie Sanders, or rather for Pete Buttigieg, because of his of the ability to show that he that he has reach, that he has traction with non-white voters. But frankly, Bernie's been saying this whole time, I'm winning this thing by expanding the electorate. I'm winning this thing by turning out young voters of color. I've seen his operation up close, the canvassing operation in East Las Vegas, which is a coordinated campaign with Las Vegas DSA, which is pretty interesting. And they're doing that work. But Honestly, in Iowa, it didn't really pan out that much. I mean, it panned out in the sense that they increased the Latino vote, and they won a majority of those who showed up. But overall turnout was not higher. And of course, in the end, you know, it they're sort of in this, maybe a delegate tie with Buttigieg. And again, that race had traditionally been called based on who won the most delegates. In New Hampshire, sure, they pulled it out, and it was higher turnout, but exit polling suggests that higher turnout actually benefited Klobuchar and Buttigieg most from crossover Republican voters.
Yeah, and I
And
wanted to talk to you about that specifically for a second because it interests me a lot. And again, we're talking with Daniel Marans, political reporter for HuffPost. Yeah, I would have to say, and Bernie was my boss for years, but I would have to say that there's no evidence, at least in New Hampshire, that they did turn out new voters. I think you're absolutely right that to the extent that there was increase in turnout, and since there are more eligible voters, there's been, as you know, a debate about how much it really was a larger turnout proportionally. But to the extent that there was, it seems to be crossover Republicans, which is, helped Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, as you just said. But I think that, if I were on the Bernie team, I might be saying right now we've predicated our strategy on increasing turnout. And I want your thoughts on this. I might be saying, unless they know something I don't, that we're not delivering on that as much as we thought we would. What do we need to do?
yeah, no, that's right. And I caught up with a number of Bernie campaign officials last night after the debate in the spin room, and some of them were more hesitant to characterize Nevada as a test in that regard. Faz Shakir, the campaign manager, said to me, "Look at our overall arc. After South Carolina and Super Tuesday, how we're going to be doing, and then you can say, really whether our quote unquote political revolution about expanding the electorate is working its magic." Chuck Rocha, who has really spearheaded the campaign's specifically Latino outreach, said to me that was a little bit more willing to put his chips on the table and said, Nevada is a brown working class state. That's why we're gonna do really well here. And I think so. There's a bit of a mix there. I'm not hearing anything about adjusting strategy. I'm just not hearing that from them. I think they still really believe in the power of throwing a ton of resources into field, but also field with a very volunteer heavy presence. And again, I mentioned that, the canvasser that I walked with was from New York, and he was picking up his campaign literature at something called the Leftist Garage in East Las Vegas. So it's not just a field heavy approach, but it's a somewhat non-traditional field heavy approach. In terms of the message itself, again, you heard Bernie double down on populism with Bloomberg as his billionaire class foil. You haven't really heard him yet sort of really lean into talking about, let's say, his pragmatic record as a lawmaker, which is considerable. And so he continues to just bet the house on the idea, forgive the gambling reference here, but bet the house on the idea that he can juice turnout, that he can generate excitement by appealing to people's economic hardship and generating and turning out these newer, younger, perhaps less frequent working class voters. And I guess we'll have to see about that. And one last thing, Richard, if you needed more evidence that he's not treating this as an opportunity to shift message or approach, I believe it was Sunday or Monday night, he was speaking to, forgive me, it was Saturday night. He was speaking to a Clark County Democratic Party dinner, and he laid into Michael Bloomberg saying, we really can't have someone who's trying to buy the nomination if we're trying to draw a contrast with Trump, somebody who's supported Social Security cuts, somebody who's opposed minimum wage hikes and all of that. And the reason we can't, he said, is because we won't be able to generate the excitement among voters. and so again, he's really still looking at this through the lens of an expanded electorate rather than persuading people who had previously, let's say, cast ballots for Trump or maybe other Democratic candidates early on in the contest.
And having expressed my, concern about, the need at some point to demonstrate, since that's part of his electability argument, right? So
Right,
having
right.
expressed my concern that he needs to show that at some point, I would, caucus primaries are, in some ways they're good because you're showing how it's that you have dedicated supporters who will come out for the process of a caucus, but it's also some ways not the ideal proof of that. But I guess the other argument in favor of it is the election of Donald Trump, which was, he seemed to energize his base more than Hillary Clinton did hers. But so aside, the other issue, obviously, and it's an issue in Nevada, it's going to be huge in South Carolina, is the issue, as you mentioned earlier, of turning out voters of color, of turning out black and brown voters. Now, obviously, Nevada is a test for that. In terms of primarily Hispanic, Latino voters, South Carolina historically large black turnout there, African American turnout. So each of these candidates has a point to make, right? Joe Biden is still saying that when he gets to South Carolina, at least as I understand it, that he's got enormous support there, and that's going to save him. Pete Buttigieg has been struggling with voters of color, so he had something to prove in Nevada. And then in South Carolina, same with Amy Klobuchar. The narrative against Bernie has always been that especially that black voters don't care for him, although I think the polling contradicts that significantly. And Elizabeth Warren, so who's rhetorically perhaps made a special point, even more so than any other candidate, of speaking to progressive African American issues. But I guess I have a couple questions. The first one is this: not one of the mistakes I think that progressives make is that assuming that voters of color of necessity are progressive. But there are conservative elements in the black community, conservative elements in the Latino community. There are centrist elements in each of these communities. Have any of these candidates found the formula for, I would say Bernie for under 30s, probably across demographic groups, he's found the formula, winning formula. But since they're all white, have any of them found a key that might help them advance their standing in black and brown communities?
Okay, a lot going on there.
Yeah,
But
sorry about that. That's how I roll. That's just how I do it.
I think the way from my way into this and the thing that I'm most comfortable speaking to is Bernie's inroads with the Latino community and how that could play out in Nevada, and what I'm going to be looking at to see whether that crosses that age barrier that you described. And then second, of course, the fact that some of the more powerful institutional players in Nevada politics are effectively sitting this contest out. And that could bring a lot of voters, especially some of those older Black and Latino voters. And there is a very significant Black community here as well, a growing Asian community. It could put some of those voters in play just by virtue of the fact that there is less of a corralling force this time. Look, it's no secret that Bernie has developed a lead among Latinos in California. More recently, we've seen that those figures jump in Nevada, and that includes people in higher age groups. And so that is one area where he appears to have made the demographic leap. When I was going at the doors yesterday with a Bernie canvasser in East Las Vegas, which is a working class in a working class sort of black and brown neighborhood, one guy we met who was just coming off work at the construction site said in Spanish, I'm 100% with Bernie. I heard about him from my sons. So there is an element there, I think, of especially new immigrants to the United States deferring to their children about the best ways to navigate American culture. And the excitement around Bernie among Latino youth who are also predominantly sort of, they're aspirational, but they remain oftentimes working class. And those are two categories of people, young, aspirational, working class people that is really just in Bernie's wheelhouse, and the fact that they are disproportionately so in the Latino community has made it appealing for them. And I would say that at this point, the sort of meme of quote unquote Tio Bernie, of Uncle Bernie, of the crotchety old man who sometimes tells hard truths, which is something apparently Latinos have told me they relate to on a cultural level. It's taken on kind of a life of its own, where people sort of buzz and speak about him by virtue of sort of the attention he gets as the Latino candidate, sometimes in the press or in their social networks. But the sort of curveball here, if I may, the variable here on his Latino support, and something I'm going to be looking for on Saturday at caucus sites on the Strip here, where it is the Culinary Union, and that is the 60,000 person union that represents hotel and casino workers here on the Strip and downtown, which it's an extraordinary labor institution. It's a right to work state, but they have over 95% dues paying membership. They pride themselves on being able to throw their weight around in terms of political endorsements, though actually their record is more mixed than you might think in that respect. They endorsed Hillary in 2008. And they endorsed her again in 2016, so it worked in 16, but it didn't in 2008, as I understand it. And they also endorsed a losing gubernatorial candidate in 2018. So this time they have not endorsed. And the rumor was that they were really leaning toward Joe Biden. When they announced that they were not endorsing, he was the only one who they singled out by name. Obviously, there's an element of familiarity. I think there's something dispositionally and in terms of personality that working class people find appealing in Joe Biden. It's not really as much about his policies, but there's a familiarity and appreciation of sort of his avuncular masculinity, if you will. But they did not endorse him, and so that leaves it all wide open. And I was at an event at the Culinary Union Hall in Vegas where Klobuchar and Warren spoke, and people were sympathetic to Warren's pitch. I did speak to some people who said they were going with Biden. But again, the key issue there is the fact that the union has told their members, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and especially Bernie, will take away our culinary health care that we fought for and replace it with something, called Medicare for all that they see as untested. I'm getting a sense that of sort of mixed reactions among union members about whether that's compelling to them. I think those that are politically involved and really read into the material that the union has given them are more susceptible to that pitch. And folks who I've been speaking to in the hotels here who look at this sort of in a more casual way are more inclined to go with their gut, which might be more like Bernie. So that's something I'm trying to see, and whether that matters. Of course, Bernie does have the endorsement of the Clark County Teachers Union here, so that's nothing to sniff at either, and that's something I'm going to be looking at closely as well.
Well, I've actually written a piece also, Daniel Marans, on the Culinary Union flap with Bernie, kind of from an actuarial analysis point of view, looking at who's right. If my editor ever green lights it, you know how that goes. Maybe someday people will read it. But so I'm very interested. One of the striking things about that to me, what's that?
Post. You were quoted. Dave Jameson quoted you in HuffPost. So we got you. We got you back.
All right. Okay. I know he quoted me, but so one of the striking things to me was that even though this was clearly a clash of interests and the culinary union leaders felt very strongly about that. I found that even a little more striking that they then did not endorse a candidate other than Bernie, which was the outcome I expected. They're furious at Bernie. They want to throw everything they can at defeating them. There's a chance to endorse Biden or somebody else. But they didn't do it. And I thought that was interesting. I'm still trying to read the tea leaves on that one. Any thoughts?
Well, that has to be a reflection of just Biden's weakness and
Okay.
an inability to see somebody to coalesce around as an alternative. And again, what we saw in this sort of the issue of the quote unquote aggressive or noxious Bernie supporters, how we could quantify exactly how that's disproportionately true of his people is a real challenge. But it is clear that the head of the union and the communications director were on the receiving end of a lot of invective. Who knows exactly what that means. I think that's hurt Bernie in so much as that's been re-injected into the bloodstream and the news cycle. And if there are people paying attention to the news, they may have heard about that in the past couple days. One other thing, just about the culinary healthcare plan. One of the reasons that the teachers union, and I spoke to the head of the union earlier today, one of the reasons that they are more amenable to Bernie on the issue of Medicare for all is, I mean, first of all, the teacher union president said to me, he's like, look, like, it's not going to happen overnight. And second of all, we don't really want to be at the mercy of the insurance market and these employers. And in this case, their employer is the Clark County School District. And the truth is, they have been getting, the teachers union is already, the future is already now for them in terms of getting their healthcare plan sort of watered down by their employer. And so they have less to lose. And that's just kind of an interesting insight. Those labor unions, frankly, it kind of reminds me of the way that the coal miners union is, the United Mine Workers of America is less averse to the Green New Deal than some of the building trades, which deal in oil and natural gas, because the coal people that have represented retired coal miners, they're like, we're already screwed. We're done.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's the unions that still have a good deal of power that are more nervous about change.
And the United Mine Workers has also signed on to Labor for Medicare for All, or Labor for Single Payer, I guess it's called. So, well, it's fascinating and nice to see labor as a force being reflected in the debate again. It's been a while. It feels like it's been a while. So we'll see which way it goes. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Daniel Marans, great reporting as always, and great talking with you as always. So thanks for coming on the program.
It's great to be here, Richard. I always love sharing my insights and getting yours.